What's up in War Eagle War Report family? It's your guy Ike Jones. We're back with another morning drop. Today we are talking about the addition of Percy Lewis to the Auburn offensive line. What does that mean for the Tigers? Y'all know how we do right here, War Report style. Let's drop it on them.
You are now listening to the War Report.
Morning drop. It is Monday, January the 15th. Hopefully everybody is having a wonderful Monday morning. And we're going to get straight into the conversation. Definitely need to be doing the necessary if you're out there on the rewatch. And that's sharing the video with everybody out there at the War Report. Hashtag get your weight up. Like the video. Give us that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Today, our conversation is going to be about the offensive line. But I would be remiss if I didn't start out by giving a big shout out to the Auburn basketball programs, both men and women's, handling business this weekend, taking care of LSU on the hardwood. The women pulling off a stunning upset yesterday of the defending national champion LSU team. Very great game. Very proud of those young women for going out there doing their thing. So hopefully you all continue to support the women's basketball team. I believe that the crowd makes a difference, man. We know what kind of advantage Neville Arena can be when it's going crazy out there, and seeing those young women go out there and get that upset, a lot of that is due to the fact that they had the crowd behind them. So definitely appreciate all the fans that showed up to support them, and shout out to them for getting that win. Back-to-back nights, Auburn taking down the Bayou Bengals. So wonderful time to be an Auburn Tiger. All right, let's get on into this conversation, though. Today, though, we're talking a little bit of football, and Percy Lewis is now an Auburn Tiger. He joins the Tigers as the newest transfer portal addition out of Mississippi State. Previously played there at Mississippi State for 2 seasons. He was at a junior college before. Last year was his first time getting real starting opportunities. But 6'8", 345 left tackle coming over from Mississippi State. Very huge transfer portal addition. Some would argue that this is probably the most impactful addition so far this offseason for Auburn, considering there were questions about how we were going to be able to replace offensive line production. We have starters that are not going to be returning, 3 of them, in fact, with your Avery Jones being out. We know we have Connor Lew to fill in there at the center position. You're not going to be able to have your tackle, not tackle, but both of your guards are going to be gone after this season, with Cam Stutz being out of there and Gunnar Britton being gone. You still have Dylan Wade there, and you still have Isaiah Miller, who started a lot of games. And, of course, we already talked about Connor Lew. So there are 3 returners coming back, but production from Isaiah Miller was lackluster at times, particularly in pass protection. So figuring out how we're going to protect the quarterback, especially if you're going to be going into a situation where you have Peyton Thorne as your incumbent starter, who struggled at times dealing with pressure, or you're going to be starting someone who has no starting experience whatsoever if we're not going to go to the transfer portal to get a new starter at quarterback. You need to make sure that you're bolstering your offensive line so that these young men have an opportunity to be able to survey the field, and you can really get the engine of your offense going, particularly in the pass game. Did pretty well last year in run blocking. I mean, wasn't stellar, but it definitely was good. We had some really great running lanes that were opened up for a lot of the games last year, despite what the productivity might have looked like on the ground. Sometimes we stifled ourselves because of some play calling situations and because we had some turnover situations on drives. But the run game was effective for the vast majority of the season. The addition of Percy Lewis is going to be something that's going to be helpful for the Auburn Tigers. When I take a look at the PFF grades for Percy Lewis, and I just look at SEC starting offensive linemen, or SEC linemen, I don't even want to say starting because I didn't limit this to a number of snaps. We're just looking at total grades for the season last year. You see, Percy Lewis is the 21st, number 21 overall, according to PFF, out of all tackles in the SEC last year. Which that doesn't sound like, anything special until you think about how many teams there are in the SEC, being 14, and there are 2 tackles lined up for each team, right? So 21 overall out of the potential starters that are out there. It's not bad. Again, considering I didn't even really do a limit to a number of snaps or anything like that. He didn't play the entirety of the season, only started the last 7 games from Mississippi State. He was rated number 33 overall against the run in the conference and number 21 overall against the pass in the conference. So Percy Lewis is a guy that's going to be able to produce. And, I mean, when I look at that, that's higher rated than any of the offensive tackles that Auburn had on the season. Now, Dylan Wade does have a higher pass grade from PFF, pass protection grade, pass blocking grade than Percy Lewis does. But outside of that, Percy Lewis as an offensive tackle is rated higher, according to PFF, than any of the tackles that Auburn had on the squad last year. So definitely an addition that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out going into the season. Now, speaking of the offensive line and the depth along the offensive line, I've already kind of looked at it a little bit or talked about it a little bit, but where does this mean that the puzzle pieces will move around for Coach Jake Thornton and how he wants to have his offensive line look in the new season? A lot of speculation as to whether or not Dylan Wade could potentially move in to be a guard. So, again, we talked about we don't have any returning starters at guard. Jeremiah Wright has played some starting snaps there at guard, and Tate Johnson has been a guy that's been, because of injury, really hasn't seen the field a lot, but a lot of the previous coaching staff have trusted him enough to want him to start out there. And the coaching staff in the spring last year under Coach Hugh Freeze was speaking highly of him. So as an interior lineman, he could potentially get in there in the mix at guard. But you do have, again, Jeremiah Wright, who has started some quality time for you and potentially could be out there. But you now have a tackle that you can put out there as one guy. And again, if Dylan Wade is going to slide in, or he could play the opposite tackle, right? You have a guy in Dylan Wade who I think played well for you at tackle. Can he play the right tackle? Not sure whether or not he can bump over to the other side. That's something maybe we'll ask Dylan. We've got a relationship with Dylan Wade. Maybe we'll reach out and see kind of what he's looking at doing, because he's never played guard before. Like, whether his size profile fits it or not, it's a position that he's unfamiliar with. So it's going to be interesting to see how they decide to do this in the spring battle. Everybody's really, focusing on the quarterback battle in the spring. It's going to be interesting to see what the battle at the offensive line is going to be. When we talk about the interior offensive line and those guards that are no longer there, we do have some young guys that are on the team, and I've spoken on them plenty of times before, who might not have the snaps but could have the talent. And then when you talk about talent at the tackle position, you'd be remiss not to bring up the fact that Tyler Johnson has been turning heads, right? So could you have a Percy Lewis and Tyler Johnson a tackle spot, and then Dylan Wade and Connor Lew, and then maybe, Jeremiah Wright, Tate Johnson? We could rotate Braden Joyner's a guy who's a Clay Wheaton, right? There's a lot of guys in that interior offensive line that we haven't gotten a lot of looks at that could be potentially just as good to fill in for what we're missing or what we lost last year. Now, you can't replace experience, and we had a very experienced offensive line, particularly on the interior of that offensive line last season. Haven't mentioned the Jaden Muskrat or Dylan Senda, right? Like, there are a lot of names out there that could potentially be really good for this football team next season. I like where the offensive line depth is now that you've added a piece in Percy Lewis that could potentially change the dynamic of how you're able to move guys around along the offensive front. And the two deep for Auburn at the offensive line is starting to look really good now that you have more tackle depth with the addition of Percy Lewis. So I think Jake Thornton is going to have his work cut out for him, trying to figure out, number one, how do you project what the depth is going to be for this line to the point where guys don't feel like they can, will need to hop in the portal post-spring? And do you have enough guys to be able to weather the storm of an eventual injury, right? Like Avery Jones getting injured, you're glad that you have a Connor Lew on that team to be able to step in and be able to play. When Isaiah Miller is hurt or Cam Stutz is going through it last season, they were able to rotate Jeremiah Wright in there a little bit, and you had some other guys that could get in there and get some snaps to be able to deal with the fact that you you were losing something when you had one of the more experienced guys go out. So we had a good opportunity to get some guys some playing time last year, but it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with this coming up this year because there are a lot of young guys in this room. I didn't even talk, EJ Harris. I didn't even talk about him. Right, there's a lot of young guys in this room who haven't played a lot of snaps, but I think have a ton of talent. And then I didn't even mention the true freshmen that are coming into this room that will have the opportunity to come in and play immediately. Coach Freeze has been a guy that will play true freshmen out there at the offensive line. He did it when he was at Ole Miss. So I don't overlook the fact that these true freshmen could come in and compete immediately for time along this offensive line. So there are a lot of options right now developing for Auburn football in terms of who can go out there and get quality minutes to protect the quarterback and be able to get the run game moving. So I like it. I like it a lot. And then you can't discount the SEC experience of a guy like Percy Lewis. So he's played in this conference. All of his starts were in conference, except for, I think, the very first one. Let me see. So, Southern Miss and Western Michigan, right? So he had the two cupcake games, but he played against Arkansas. He was against Auburn, Kentucky, Texas A&M, who has a fierce front seven, and then Ole Miss. He played in all those games, so he has SEC snaps, and he has the experience to go out there and be able to compete in the trenches. Going to be interesting to see how that goes. All right, that's enough of me talking. We need to get over here into this comment section, and we appreciate everybody for jumping in here with us here on the Morning Drop. As always, the Morning Drop is brought to you by our show sponsor, Rogue Shop. Make sure you head over to rogueshop.com. America's #1 online dispensary is the Rogue Shop. If you need something for sleep, stress, anxiety, pain, they have a relief medicine for you right there at Rogue Shop. Make sure you head over there, rogueshop.com, using code RAPPORT when you do that. Now, let's get over here to the comment section and see what you all are talking about this morning. Definitely appreciate everybody who is dropping in here with your guy, Ike Jones. We will get the conversation started off with a lot of people talking about Will Rogers, but P-Pass says he knows how to protect Will Rogers. That's great. I guess there is some speculation from fans that Will Rogers, who has subsequently re-entered the transfer portal after his coach Kalen DeBoer decided he was going to be leaving Washington. That's where Will Rogers had committed out of the transfer portal, and he was like, "Hey, man, I came up here for the DeBoer offense. I'm not staying here." So now it seems as if the bidding war is on for Will Rogers' services again. Could he potentially end up at Alabama following the head coach and offensive coordinator, or could he potentially, go somewhere else? And Auburn fans, of course, are hoping that that's a potential there. I don't know how well he fits into what Coach Hugh Freeze and staff want to do, but that is definitely a potential guy to look out for. Let's see. Haley jumps in and says, LSU basketball is trash. Actually, both very good teams. I want to jump in and say, yeah, they're trash, but hey, we got the dubs on both men's and women's side. They're actually both really good basketball teams, which make those quality wins for Auburn. And I am very happy at the outcomes that we had. The men's basketball team in blowout fashion, the women's basketball team in a tough contested contest, in a tightly contested contest. I think it's going to be interesting because I believe the women's basketball team has to make the trip to Baton Rouge as well. So I'm going to be looking forward to seeing how that game plays out when Auburn has to face them again, because I have a feeling that game is going to be very, very chippy. Because it was a physical game this time. It's going to be interesting. Jonathan Boyson jumps in and says he's got great size for a left tackle. I have to agree 100%. Speaking of Percy Lewis, he is the kind of prototypical left tackle, right? 6'7", 6'8", 330 plus is kind of what you want for your tackle. He moves pretty well, strong physical type. So I am looking forward to getting into his film a little bit more. And your boy Ike Jones is going to get the film for y'all. So we're going to definitely take a look at some snaps from Percy Lewis. So y'all make sure y'all stay tuned for that. The Walker Show jumps in and says, if Auburn wants to pass more, then Will Rogers would work. But I'm not saying he's going to Auburn, probably going to Bama. So If Auburn wants to pass more, Will Rogers is definitely a guy that you could look at because he's proven that he can be in a pass happy offense. So, um, again, I don't know how well the fit is for what Coach Hugh Freeze wants to do with his RPO style. And I've said this many times before: you don't have to be a running quarterback to play in an RPO offense. So it's not really about whether or not I think that um, that Will Rogers will be able to run the ball well. It's about whether or not the passing concepts fit with what he wants to do. Now, if you're going to have a lot of the option route stuff that we were attempting to do early in the season last year, then Rogers works for you because he has worked in these spread, you know, offenses that work off of those same types of concepts. So if the passing concepts are going to be option routes, he knows how to do that coming out of the air raid because the vast majority of air raid is option routes. So he understands how to read those leverages, and if he's got a couple of receivers that understand that stuff too, this is why I think the Robert Lewis edition is kind of a sneaky good addition because he understands a little bit of those concepts as well. So you may have some guys that can get up to speed more quickly with understanding how to read defensive leverages that will help your young guys be able to learn that system more quickly and come along and be able to contribute sooner. So we'll see how it goes. D. Lee, or DL Lee, I think there's two L's right there. 92 says, yeah, that O-line got to be clutch if we get Will Rogers. PT definitely saved himself from a lot of sacks this year. We need a guy with some type of mobility for this offense. You don't need it. Again, you don't need mobility for this offense. It's a nice to have, not a need to have. It's really more so about, are you able to make the right read quickly enough? Peyton Thorne definitely saved Auburn from having more sacks on the stat sheet because of some of the mobility that he has and his ability to escape pressure. So bolstering the offensive line is going to be helpful. It also is going to be helpful if you have the quarterback able to read and recognize quickly enough to get the ball out of his hands where the pressure doesn't have time to get to him. So that is something that Will Rogers has been able to do in his career. Now, he hasn't been particularly great when he's been under pressure because he doesn't have a ton of mobility. So it's going to be incumbent upon whomever it's going to be at the quarterback to be able to understand where to go with the football, to be able to evade that pressure with your arm, with your mind, being able to see where you need to go. It's going to be crucial because that is really the best way to be able to play the quarterback position. Corey Weber brings up a good point here. Says last day for Auburn to get transfers in to be eligible for spring is the 17th, which is this Wednesday. Things would need to happen soon. So eligibility for spring is going to be important for you to be able to get guys in learning your system early. So we've got a couple more days here for Auburn to try to land some folks in the transfer portal if you want to get them in that spring window. I think defensive line is going to be the most imperative thing to continue to grow depth there. I like the addition of Trill Carter. I'd like to see like another true nose tackle be able to emerge for that defensive line depth. And I think Auburn has still been entertaining some people in the defensive backfield to try to fill out that room, get more depth there. Particularly another outside corner. I've seen some conversations about those things. But listen, I think the thing that Auburn needs to really be focusing on right now is making some hires, and I'm hoping that we can see somebody get hired here in the next couple of days. JJ Brand jumps in and says, Connor is a hell of an anchor for an O-line. I agree 100%. Connor Lew showed himself to be a wonderful true freshman. He got, true freshman all SEC honors last year, well-deserved at the center position, and he is going to be a guy that hopefully continues to grow, but a lot of people around that facility feel like Connor Lew can be a beast for years to come for Auburn, and I'm hoping he continues to grow in that. Jonathan Boyson brings up an interesting point. It will be telling, but I haven't heard of any Washington players jumping the portal to follow their coach. That's definitely a good thought. I don't know that a lot of players now that the offensive coordinator is potentially going to be coming to Alabama as well, then that will be, I think, a little bit more telling because the thought was maybe that the OC was just going to step up and be the new head coach. Now that that potentially is not going to be happening, I think you may see some additional transfer portal movement from Washington. Plus, they had a lot of guys that had a lot of experience on that team. I don't know how many of the young guys, really had an opportunity under that old coaching staff. They had filled out quite a bit there with the transfer portal, if I'm not mistaken. So it definitely is going to be interesting. Plus, hopping in the transfer portal to try to go to Alabama, you need to see more attrition from that Alabama roster before you thought that you potentially had a chance to even go play over at Alabama. So, I don't know how telling it's going to be. Maybe hitting the transfer portal in general because your coach isn't there definitely would be something that you could look into as a telling sign. But I don't know if none of them come over from Washington to Alabama. I wouldn't make that correlation necessarily, just because there's already a ton of talent on the Alabama roster. So, like, filling out that roster with Washington folks might not be the best proposition for Bama unless there are some dynamic wide receivers, because that seems to be the position that's taken the biggest hit so far from that Bama roster. So we'll see. Jonathan Boyson, another question here, and says, do you still think Nix will be the OC? Are we going to get going in a different direction? I Nix was just the biggest name, or the name that was tied most closely to Auburn initially. I don't know that I ever thought Derek Nix was definitely going to be the guy. And so, I think that if it was going to be Derek Nix, it should have happened already. There's no real reason for it not to have happened. I also think that if you were going to just promote one of the guys that you had on staff, that should have happened already. I understand some of the hesitation around trying to figure out what was going to happen with the Carnell Williams situation. And so hopefully we see some movement here by the end of the day today. I really want to see coordinator hires now. By the end of the week is probably more realistic, but it's time to see some movement in that direction and see some concrete names start to develop there, and hopefully that will be the case here soon. Now, whether it's Derek Nix or some other person, I don't know the answer to that just yet, but I do think that we'll see some momentum start to pop up here in a little bit. All right. I think that's it for today. We're going to get out of here. I appreciate everybody for dropping in with me this morning. As always, the morning drop is brought to you by Rogue Shop. Make sure you all head over to rogueshop.com and use code RAPPORT when you do so. Before you get out of here, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be back at you with another morning drop tomorrow. But until then, and as always, War Eagle.